earthquakes that level entire cities, tsunamis that swallow coastal towns whole, volcanoes that spew ash and lava rain destruction from the sky. These are just some of the natural disasters that Japan faces regularly. But why is this island nation so susceptible to nature's wrath? In this video, we will see why Japan has the worst geography on Earth. So stick around to discover the real reasons behind it. Japan is a land of extremes, with beautiful natural scenery and both modern and traditional ways of life. But behind its bright surface is a landscape that has shaped and tested the country throughout its past. Japan's geography is very different from other places. John Mearsheimer, a political scientist, introduced the term the stopping power of water. He's basically saying that big bodies of water like seas can make it hard for countries to show off their power. Soldiers can march on land, but what about water? Not so much. And ships weren't exactly lightning fast back then, especially with unpredictable weather, such as the kamikaze winds that impeded the Mongols. Located in the Pacific Ocean, Japan is quite a distance from the Asian mainland. The closest point between Japan and the mainland is the Strait of Korea, about 200 kilometers wide. To put that in perspective, it's way wider than the English Channel. Because of this setup, Japan is what you'd call an insular maritime power, which means that it's mainly vulnerable to attacks from the sea. On one hand, this is good because it makes it harder for enemies to invade, but it also meant Japan was stuck on its island for a big chunk of history, not mingling much with its neighbors. Sure, things like ideas and culture were traded, but it was slow going compared to what was happening on the mainland. Technology and Buddhism, for example, took their time getting to Japan. When Japan did try to venture onto the mainland, like the invasions of Korea in the 7th and 16th centuries, it was a mixed bag of success and failure. And even when Japan got its act together with some maritime muscle, like during the Meiji Restoration, it wasn't all smooth sailing. They heavily relied on their sea routes, which made them vulnerable. Then came World War II, and the United States decided to exploit Japan's weakness at sea. They targeted Japan's shipping lanes, cutting off vital supply routes and crippling Japan's industry. Coming to the next point, Japan has huge mountains and unstable earthquakes, greatly impacting the country's growth. Those mountains are not just big piles of rocks. They're serious obstacles that make it hard to move around, especially if you're trying to wage war with tanks and fancy armored forces. Plus, they're not great for building roads or laying down train tracks. Japan is all about islands, thousands of them. But when we say Japan, we mainly talk about 4 big ones: Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. Together, they make Japan roughly as big as California, but spread out differently. If you plonk Japan next to the US, its southern tip would say hi to Miami, while the north would be chilling above Halifax. So, is Japan's population distribution as disturbed as its geography? Japan's got a hefty crowd, over 127 million strong. But most of them are squeezed onto Honshu, the biggest island. Why? Because Japan's got a mountain obsession. 73% of the land is nothing but peaks and valleys. If you look at a map, you'll see this massive chain of mountains running right down the middle of the main islands, splitting them into 2 halves, one facing Asia and the other facing the Pacific Ocean. That leaves only a tiny slice of land for everyone else, making it as crowded as a Tokyo subway during rush hour. This mountain setup isn't just a pain for getting from one place to another. It's also played a big role in Japan's history. While China was busy building empires on its massive plains, Japan dealt with these towering obstacles. They made it super tough for anyone to take control of the whole country. Instead of having one big, unified nation, Japan ended up with all these smaller regions, each doing its own thing. That's why various shogunates and feudal domains were in control. And let's not forget about the cities, Osaka and Tokyo, crammed into flat spots between those mountains. The Kanto Plain, for example, is a big deal. It's Japan's largest area of flat land, perfect for farming and building. And guess what? Tokyo's smack dab in the middle, hosting 38 million people in a space no bigger than Kuwait. But Japan's got a resource problem. With only 12% of the land good for farming, they always look elsewhere for food, borrowing stuff because they're short on their own. No oil, gas, or minerals to brag about here. You also can't plant crops on steep slopes, and constructing roads and cities is a real headache. So not only do mountains mess with politics and warfare, but they also limit what you can do with the land. And then there are the disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, and even volcanoes acting up. Japan is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a horseshoe-shaped zone stretching from the western coast of the Americas through the Aleutian Islands, down to the eastern coast of Asia and the islands of Southeast Asia, and then back up to the western coast of the Americas. It's well known for its high seismic activity and volcanic eruptions, but there is something even stranger down the pipeline. We all know rivers are like nature's highways, offering a cost-effective and efficient way to transport goods, supplies, and people. But when it comes to Japan, it's a bit of a different story. Thanks to Japan's mountainous terrain, its rivers are short, steep, and fast-flowing, making them impossible to navigate. You can imagine the challenge this caused in connecting different parts of the archipelago. So, instead of relying on rivers like other countries, Japan had to turn to coastal shipping and routes within the Seto Inland Sea to get around. During World War II, Japan's coastal shipping routes were crucial for moving goods and people around. However, when the US started targeting them with submarines, it greatly affected Japan's internal transportation system. The damage wasn't so much to the shipping coming from other countries, but to the vital circulation of goods and people along Japan's own coastlines. So, while rivers might be a lifeline for some countries, for Japan, they've been more of a missed opportunity. And there is a major problem with plains too. Lowland plains play a critical role in a country's development and politics. But when it comes to Japan, plains are a rarity. Only 3 major ones are crammed onto central Honshu and hemmed in by mountains: the Nobi Plain, the Osaka Plain, and the biggest, the Kanto Plain. Today, you'll find most of Japan's bustling cities and population centers in these plains. Historically, the Osaka Plain was the heart of the ancient Yamato civilization, with cities like Nara and Kyoto serving as imperial seats. Its proximity to the Seto Inland Sea made it perfect for sea power, trade, and fishing. Still, having these plains spread out and limited in size made things tricky for Japan's political unity. It took centuries for the country to unify under one rule, and even then, the shoguns often struggled to control the regional lords scattered across the mountainous islands. To sum up, Japan succeeded despite its difficult geographical location. It built railroads, used water power, and did very well economically. Even with limited plains, it was unified under the shogunate. Geography may impact a country, but Japan proved that everything is possible with perseverance and creativity.